I'm going to begin by just reading a little bit on Cassandra's artist statement and just a little bit of an introduction. So Cassandra Eustace is an artist and educator based in Cork City. Her work explores the resistance, simplicity and freedom of connecting to what is uncertain in our lives, but ultimately what sustains us. Mental health issues underpin much of Cassandra's work. The ongoing theme of impermanence shows in her process of using a gestural application and layering. We'll get to this through the talk as she talks about the processes that she uses. Sometimes visible, sometimes not. Multiple finished pieces are covered over or scraped into when drawn on the flat surface of paper, canvas or other. Cassandra works out of the Backwater Artist Studios in Wandesford Quay here in Cork, where she shares her studio with her twin sister Megan. And together they work on various projects, including the drawing clinic. Cassandra also teaches drawing workshops, and she specializes in sensorium drawing, which we might get in the Q&A actually, using creative mindful techniques to improve personal health, mental health and well-being. Cassandra's work has been exhibited widely, both nationally and internationally, including recently at the Stern View Gallery in Cork City and at Strade Secondarie San Pietro, Como in Italy. And currently, as part of the Glucksman exhibition, selected works from the UCC Art Collection, she has a series of new drawings, collective memories from the Glen, on display. So that is going to be the focus of today's talk. We're going to look at this newly commissioned artworks. And the artworks were developed in partnership with St. Brendan's senior community in the Glen on the north side of Cork City. And they explore memory, community, and the community's connection to place. Yesterday, I caught up with Cassandra to discuss the project, the collaboration with St. Brendan's, and the journey she went on to create these drawings. So today's talk is going to focus on the drawings behind you, collective memories from the Glen, newly acquisitioned into the University Art Collection. And we're lucky enough, fortunate enough that you live within the 5K radius of the gallery, so we're safely able to get you in next to your works. And they're going to be the focus of today's talk is going to be around these works, the development of the works, and the project that inspired them. And just for those people who do not know, the collective memories from the Glen drawings were a series of drawings that were commissioned by the Glucksman. We commissioned Cassandra to work with St. Brendan's senior community in the Glen and to develop a new body of work that responded to their experiences. And so this is kind of a practice of commissioning that we have been exploring with different communities and different artists over the last number of years. And in spring 2020, we invited Cassandra to take part in our creative aging program, working with older people to give them creative opportunities and to develop new artworks. So the work with St. Brendan's looked at, I suppose, we wanted to explore their relationship to their place, to their community, to look at the residential development of the Glen in the 1960s, and the development of the identity of the Glen as a neighbourhood. And so the community attended creative consultations with Cassandra here in the Glucksman in the spring, as well as taking part in drawing workshops and visiting the special collections in the Boole Library from the university. So the project has been funded by the Arts Council of Ireland, and the works are now been acquisitioned into the University Art Collection. So Cassandra, to start maybe, and we might take you back to early 2020, to the spring, and those first sessions with the community here at the Glucksman. So maybe just to describe a little bit about what those sessions, we call them creative consultations, but what those sessions felt like, how the community might have responded to your practice and to you as an artist as you introduced yourself, and maybe how you drew on your experience as an educator, or the way that you collaborate quite closely with your sister. You share a studio with her and are involved in projects with her, or even your relationship with your own mother and how you were able to draw on those experiences to, I suppose, to establish a working relationship with the community over those initial sessions?
That's a good question. Those initial sessions, I think that actually even that first session, Tadhg, I was delighted. How many people did we have turn up? We had nearly sort of 14 or 16 people turn up, which was fabulous that so many people were interested enough to come along. And I was keen to get involved in the project because, as you said, you know, my own mum, she's in her 90s, and I know how valuable oral history is. All her stories are going to die with her when she goes. So I was very happy to be working with the seniors from St. Brendan's and just be open to whatever they were going to be talking about and listen to them. And can't remember what else you said that you wanted to know, to be honest.
Yeah, so I suppose like in terms of the feeling of those first sessions and the energy in the room, like because I attended some of those sessions with you, so just that maybe you can kind of relay what we did and what it felt like to be in that space with the community.
I think it was very exciting. I think the fact that you introduced me and invited me, you know, onto the project at the beginning, and you were very open about what I could do. I went through this process before I even met them, met the group, which I was very nervous about meeting them. But I went through this process of going, okay, I need to just be very open to my approach and have no preconceived ideas about what was going to happen, what I was going to do, and any kind of outcome. So, as I said, arriving at in the afternoon down in the river room and having such a large group turn up, it was very exciting. It was nerve-wracking and exciting. It was their first time for a lot of the group, I found out later, to have come to the university and come to the Glucksman. So I think there was a nervousness with them in the group as well. But very, very quickly one was aware of the chatter and the energy of the group, and also a sense of community already in the group. That I think that came across very strongly. It wasn't just a group of people who didn't know each other and they'd been brought together in our room to take part. There was a sense, you know, that cohesiveness of the community from St. Brendan's already there. So, yeah, it was very exciting. And also the chatter that was going on, it was obvious as well after that first session that trying to control the chatter and everyone talking was going to be very difficult. And I remember after that first session, I went home kind of like, oh my goodness, there's no way I'm going to be able to make enough notes to keep up with everything. I looked at my notes and half of them didn't make sense. And I think it was that part of the process of how I was going to approach the project began then, because I just thought, gosh, next week I'm going to have to go in and do something differently. And of course, drawing was the automatic thing because it's part of my fundamental part of my practice. I thought, I can draw quicker than I can write and make notes. So next week I will draw as well as making notes. And that was the drawing right at the start came about because I realized I couldn't keep up with all the conversation, the cross-talking.
Yes, and that energy and the importance of the tea and the chatter and the catch-ups that may have strayed quite far away from our objective and the theme of the project is captured nicely in your drawing, memory drawing the women chit-chat and sandwiches, which we're showing there now. And there was moments where we were in the middle of the room looking at each other going, I can't hear anything with the noise. But when we did distill down through the conversations and brought some clarity to the conversations, some kind of interesting revelations popped up that probably we didn't fully appreciate even at the beginning of the project, and particularly around the hasty development of the Glen housing in the Glen in the 1960s. They were erected in response to a national housing crisis at the time. And of course, back last year, and particularly and at the start of this year with the election, that was certainly a kind of a pressing matter, and certainly at the tip of everyone's tongue in terms of a national crisis. So that also kind of opened up a whole set of new conversations for us with the group, didn't it, Cassandra? And I suppose how the group might have been divided from where they came from and how they felt about that area in the North Side.
Yes. The group contained people that had actually moved to the Glen from outside of the surrounding area. I mean, the Glen, from what I understand, wasn't actually housed by people organically living right on the periphery of that area. It was mostly from people who were needing houses, need to be housed out of the city, out of the flats and everything, and they were housed up there. So they were kind of brought in and almost outsiders then to the already sort of like native community. The group that we had from St. Brendan's, they were some people who had been grown up and from when the Glen first existed, and some of the people from who are living on the outside. I think that was a very nice thing about the community centre there, is that they are a community centre for everybody in that local area. The interesting thing, I think, what I noticed is that the conversation about their housing and where they're living from this group of women who are all seniors, it was very philosophical. We were never discussed about the social housing problems and all the other well-documented issues around the Glen. You know, the fact that it was created and there were no post boxes, no telephones, no shops, no local amenities when the housing estate was first established. So our conversations throughout were very much about reflective on the positivity of it. And I think that also fed into why I ended up making the work the way I made the work, because this strong sense of community that came from those conversations, and friendship and companionship amongst the women. So it was more peripheral conversations that I had outside of the group about more of the issues around, the Glen and the difficulties with that kind of social housing back then. As I said, that has already been well documented.
Yeah, and it was quite interesting, I suppose, for certain members of the group. They were recollecting the area of the Glen as the countryside and how overnight it became the city. And there was a whole group of new people moving into their area. But and certainly they were bound by a sense of community, those who came newly to the Glen and those who would have lived all of their lives in the North Side area. There was a huge sense of community and a sense of positiveness about their area. And our last session was on, I think it was the 14th or 15th of March, where we went to the University Special Collections archives to look at ways that areas are documented, not just through maps, but through postcards, and a wonderful session there. And then, of course, the project fell victim to COVID, like so many of our programs and exhibitions have done. And for you, I suppose you were left in a state of limbo, Cassandra, because we were mid-flow in this project. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that time, and particularly like life as an artist during that first lockdown.
Yes, that was a sudden shock. We literally had our last session and then we locked down, didn't we? Like 3 days later or 2 days later or something. Yes, as an artist, it was challenging. I did a raid on my studio, and being an artist in the middle of the project, I hadn't a clue what I was meant to be raiding from the studio to take home. And I moved furniture about at home to try and make myself a desk. And then the first few months, I actually couldn't make any work anyway. I just was creatively, it was a flat line for me. I started cooking, which was equally as odd as not being able to make work. when normally I can make work no matter what's going on. So that left me thinking about the project though instead a lot. And you know, when I started coming out of that creative kind of quarry of nothing, I started just using what I did have around. You know, I was doing odd ink drawings of the women, and I think that time had been spent just thinking about the women a lot and about what I'd gotten from our interaction so far, which again kept circling back to the women being more important than the actual physicality of the Glen. You know, the Glen is nothing without women and all the stories that we've been listening to together, and their sense of friendship and companionship together. So I think the first drawing that I started deciding to do was initially about the lockdown, and it's that one over there. You can probably see it on the screen now, but I was so overwhelmed with being out of touch with the project and it starting up again, and having that kind of that odd space where I was just doing a lot of cerebral thinking and doing some research online about it, that I thought, how can I actually approach making of the work? And in the overwhelm, I realized that I just had to go completely back to basics. I ditched all my other fabulous ideas I thought I was going to do, and for me, basics is just pen and pencil and paper, sorry. So I just got the pencil and paper out and just thought, I know about drawing. I know drawing reveals what you need to know. Drawing is process. And so I knew that if I chose my processes by thinking about what I wanted to say in each piece of work, I could choose a drawing process that could then talk about that. So drawing talks about process, talks about its subject. So like the lockdown drawing, I was aware of, I'd taken a couple of photographs before we left of the empty chairs, and you know, they became very pertinent in the lockdown, and I was thinking about these empty chairs, and that there were no voices, and they were just waiting for the women to come back together again, and they just seemed just that emptiness, and yet they had been filled with all this busy noise. And so that drawing, I wanted to try and convey the idea of the stress of COVID, the isolation that I knew the women were probably going through, because my mum was being shielded in the UK with my sister, and I know how hard it was for them. So I understood the difficulty of seniors during this period as well. So this drawing, I decided to divide it up into the amount of women that we had mostly in the group. So I think there's about between 12 and, on average, around 12 or 14 sections. And I was thinking about the chairs, and then what I did was I overlaid on tracing paper, because I did this quite in the other drawing as well behind me. I drew out a lot of chairs, I overlaid them, I created a composite of the idea of the chairs as a single drawing, and then I cut up that drawing, and all I could do is I'd only draw one panel from each of that original drawing that I did, and then I drew that onto the image that you see hanging there. So that all I could see was a centimetre of my original drawing each time, and I would cover it up because I just wanted this idea of being in lockdown, and our vision had become quite myopic. You know, we were all just kind of, our world had sort of shrunk to this one vision. So that drawing is about the stress, the emptiness, and there's some legs of the ladies you can see just in the bottom there, sort of alluding back to the emptiness, the loss of them actually being in the room there. And yeah, so that was my starting off point, was just actually doing that original drawing, and thinking about, oddly, they weren't there. The project was about the women, but the first drawing I did was actually without the women in there, and it just felt that was what was meant to be.
And with the support of Noreen Glynn and St. Brendan's, who was a huge support throughout the project, we were able to safely restart during the summer, where you visited St. Brendan's Community Centre to conduct interviews with the ladies. And then I suppose as things opened up and you were able to take walks through the area and I suppose make connections to the locations that the women were identifying in the sessions, you were able to kind of get things back up and running again. And that was combined with, I suppose, visits to the archives and chats with a local historian that I suppose broadened the project for you and made you think about it in different ways. Can you tell us a little bit about that stage?
Yeah, that was really important for me, just to do a kind of a more circular research, even though it was limited because of we were still coming out of lockdown with it all, but to do more circular research about the area, especially I think the visit to the archives was fascinating. I wanted to see where the Glen was, what the Glen was. So, you know, looking back at some of the earlier maps, I think it was by 1834, and seeing the lovely little drawings of Glen Wood, you know, where the Glen Valley is and all that area. And there were just fields there. And there were some deeds from the 1700s and some of the sections of land which could possibly be from that area. And these fields had fabulous names like the Pear Field and the Pleasure Garden and the Violet Field. And, you know, in the area there's Susie's Field that some of the women talked about, and has since been built on, but wasn't built on in the first wave of the Glen housing estate being built. So, and that struck me that they were talking about Susie's Field. So going back to the archives and seeing the names of these other fields that were possibly in the area, just was a nod to this is what North Cork was like before all the industry started. And talking to Jared, the historian, who's doing his history project, I mean, he's writing a book on the industry of the area. That was also fascinating to get a picture of what was happening in the 50s even. And but as I said, back in the archives and the map, just watching Cork, going through all the maps and watching the city growing up like this, spreading out until eventually that small part of the Glen was built on. It was very interesting. Helped locate me in the space just as going down there and walking around and taking photographs and talking to other locals from the Glen, who weren't living in the Glen, but in the Glen area, should I say, right beside. It was just helped embellish, I suppose. And when I was doing the two drawings with which are talking about the outside, I wanted to do drawings at the very end of the project of the series. I wanted to do drawings that were talking about the outside of the space. And so those drawings came along at the end when they were a composite of all the information, all the interviews, all the thinking, all the exploring. I was in my studio and doing a process that I do it's a very experiential sensory experience. I'm very quiet, I'm very much in my thought and my mind, and you know, because drawing is an embodied experience, you're never just drawing with your hand and whatever your hand is in on the surface. You know, you're drawing with, you know, what you had for breakfast, the last discussion you had with your mom, your thoughts about the TV film, or the ache in your body from hunching over, you know, the pain in your shoulder. Drawing brings everything into yourself. So you're literally drawing yourself whenever you're making a mark. And so I find these drawings are that. They're bringing, especially that one, I think they're bringing everything into it. So I wanted the drawings to talk about the vents, you know, they're the vents there from the tunnel that was built from Mallow to Cork. They needed ventilation shafts, and they were built in around, I think, 1847, I want to say. Around that period, these ventilation shafts, one's right there in the glen, and so I wanted that there just to go, well, this is what was happening as the industrialisation of the area occurred. These vents were built. This is what was happening in the glen before the housing estate was built. That vent was there, and it's still there. And the trees in there were motifs, not just from when the women were drawing their home, in the chatty women, the chitty chatty drawing, the women are actually drawing their home there. Loads of trees came up, so, and there are trees up there now. In the Glen River Valley, although it was called Glenwood, and then all the trees were wiped out for World War I, they took every tree, felled every tree. It is being re-established now, Glen River Amenity Park, and it's a fabulous place nowadays to go through. Anyway, the trees were a big part for the women. They just cropped up in all their drawings, so that's why the trees are also in there. And then also a nod to the housing. You know, there's 6 chimneys in that drawing there, and the housing blocks were built in blocks of 6. You know, and the gable ends there. You know, these big gable ends were built first, apparently. You know, 7 per block of 6, and when you're walking around, the gable ends are very obvious, and so I wanted to include, they kind of cropped up as well in the drawing, which I hadn't really thought about. You know, when you're doing these kind of drawings, you don't really think too much about them. It all just kind of comes out, and you kind of reflect on it afterwards. So.
And those drawings provide a beautiful balance to, I suppose, the energy and vibrancy of those social meetings. And that social aspect was hugely important to the community, insofar as when we first attempted to restart the project via online discussions or through mail-outs, they were having none of it, because it really was about the meeting, coming to a museum space or university space and meeting the artist and having the discussions and the tea and sharing their stories. But interesting that you have brought in kind of a history beyond that as well of the area, and how the evolution of the area before the 1960s and before the development right back as such a rich history. And it will be interesting to share that with the community when we eventually have the opportunity. And because part of the process really was about taking the community on a journey with you as an artist, so that they would be able to feel part of the creation of these works. And of course, that became much more difficult. But did you feel that sense of pressure or burden when you were in the studio making the works, feeling that you were trying in some way to represent their experiences? Was there a pressure attached to that?
Oh, yes, I think there was a huge pressure, and I think especially at the beginning, you know, like I was saying, you know, that pressure at the beginning, that how on earth was I going to do this? I hadn't a clue, and I think I literally had to say, I don't know what I'm going to do, I don't know how I'm going to do it. And I think that pause, when we had that pause with the lockdown, there was a part there where I was so kind of, well, it might not happen, phew, I won't have to try and figure this out at one stage, you know. And then that was kind of the worst case scenario. You kind of wake up going like, how on earth can I do this justice? And then as it starts developing and my thoughts around it, I guess, start developing, I kind of realized that pressure, that pressure only sits heavily on you if you don't know what you're doing. And I suppose what I mean by that is I eventually figured out what the project was about and what I was doing. And, you know, and I believed in that. And I think also because as well, it was about the women for me in the end. It was them as individuals, as a collective, that I felt that not so much their stories, I wanted the storyteller became more as important, shall I say, because there was only me listening all at once to everybody very often, listening to the individual stories. I could only take on board so much. So it was actually the storyteller I realized was what was really important as well for me as being, you know, taking part in this project. So I wanted these images to talk about the storyteller. You know, I wanted the women to be in my drawings so that people would say, oh, who are these women? You know, where is that? And let the conversations hopefully develop from that, you know, like the image at the end, which I think it's the one about home. I can't remember what I called it, but something about, what was it, home. This is what I kind of figured out as well. Home isn't so much about where, but who. Talk about the who's and you find your home. So that kind of sums it up as well for me. That's what they taught me, I guess. So that pressure of representing them, I kind of took in what they said and gave that back out, or that's what I get back. Does that make sense? So that idea that home isn't about where but who just came across so strongly that that's what I wanted to, that's how I wanted to represent them, if that makes sense.
Wonderful, and a really nice way to conclude, Cassandra. Thank you so much. Just, I suppose, to say that due to the restrictions and a number of the group cocooning and so on, we haven't been able to reveal the works to the group in the way we would have liked. And of course, initially the plan was to have your work exhibited as part of the Bealtaine Festival in May. And now they're on display in Gallery 1. But unfortunately, we're closed to the public for another few weeks yet. But the good news is we will be touring the works to St. Brendan's senior community with thanks to Cork City Council Commemoration Fund, where the seniors will get to meet you and to hear about that process and to see the works firsthand in a safe way. And that will just begin, I suppose, a long-term kind of relationship within works and different communities, and in particular the university community here, as now they're part of the University Art Collection. They will go on to, I suppose, share the women's stories with students and with staff here within the university. Cassandra, thank you so much. I'm going to let the final word to you. I suppose it's important that to say that it has been a pleasure working on this project with you, because you've made it so easy and you've really invested in it. And gave so much to the project, as we knew you would, but I really want to thank you so much for that. Do you have anything you'd like to conclude with, Cassandra?
I'd just like to thank yourself as well, Tadhg, for inviting me onto this project, and for Glucksman for supporting me in the project as well. It's been a real eye-opener, and I challenged my practice, which is what I hoped I would do with it, and I just want to thank you very much for that. And also just want to thank the ladies from the St. Brendan's Community Centre, and I'm looking forward to meeting them again. Without them, this work wouldn't exist, so I really owe them a debt to say thank you for that.